So she's interested in the Enlightenment, and she might be interested in some of these reforms. But she knows that if you give the people an inch, what are they going to take?
A mile.
A mile. Okay? And so the results in all three of these countries, for the most part, are that these reforms die out, fade away, or overturned, because what group of people will not play ball with reform? In each of these cases. What group of people in those societies said no? Who was going to lose their slaves? Don't say slave owners, it's another word. What's another word for the upper class? Nobility. These monarchs did rely on somebody for rule, the nobility. The nobility helped them rule over the people. If the nobility wasn't on board whatever they were doing, then that monarch was probably going to be tossed. So when we study the initiation of the Enlightenment starts with the nobility, right guys? Remember, we read about how it didn't really make it down to the masses because a lot of those people could not read, could they? So for all of this talk of, I'm an enlightened absolute ruler, is that really possible?
No.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because of what Catherine said. If you start making changes, what might the people want? More changes. Until everybody's all equal, and the nobility doesn't want that, right? So how can you distract your population really easily? What's going to get every population together? Say it?
War.
War. Okay? So what's really one of the most unenlightened things that a government can do? Go to war. But what was war considered? It was the sport of... In the era we're studying, they called war the sport of kings. Because monarchs could simply say, there's been a violation of this territory or that. In the case of Maria Theresa, she loses Silesia in 1740 because Frederick wants to take it. That's the War of Austrian Succession, right guys? Turn to the War of Austrian Succession in your page, in your book. What page is that?
313.
Say it?
313.
313. So this war begins because the Emperor of Austria dies, and his only heir is a woman. And this is Maria Theresa. So here we see this sexist, misogynist sort of view. Frederick the Great says, I'm going to gamble that if I attack Prussia, she won't have the political strength to resist my attack. All right, well, the war turns into a war between what countries? We have two alliances here, right? France and Britain are always going to be opposed in our little wars that we study, right? So who's allied with Austria in this one?
Russia and Britain.
Let's slow down for a minute. Prussia attacks Austria. Okay? And France and Britain have to be on one side or the other. Where are they?
Great Britain's with Prussia and France is with Austria.
Okay, and this is interesting to pay attention to because what happens in the next war? They switch sides, the Austrians and the Prussians. Okay? Long story short, the cause of this war is a land grab. Now, what did Frederick the Great have to say about the balance in Europe? What did these monarchs swear to each other that they were going to maintain?
On the property.
Okay, close,
The
right?
land.
It's a phrase. If you're maintaining your property and no one's taking anybody's property, that's a balance of what? Say it? No, a balance of, if all of the powers are content with their borders, we have a balance of power. When this balance is violated, what occurs?
War.
War. Not just a war between, in this case, Austria and Prussia, but the other nations have a vested interest in this war because what has someone altered or tried to alter? The balance of power. Okay, so this war goes on for 8 years. It ends in 1748. And according to the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, what were the Prussians supposed to do with Silesia? Give it back to who?
To
Austria. And what did Frederick simply say? Make me. He refused. And the powers were tired and they wanted to have the war over, so Silesia remained part of Prussia at that point. Then we fast forward to the 7 Years' War. Now, where did this war actually start? Did you guys pay close attention when you were reading? Where did this war start? It didn't start in 1756. That's when it began in Europe. So it started somewhere else.
1740.
It started in 1754. And do you know who started it? A guy named George Washington. He's not in your book, is he?
No.
Who was George Washington working for in 1754?
U.S.
Rodrigo, you getting all this down? Because this is all the stuff that's going to be on the quiz. Who's George working for in 1754?
British?
Yeah, he's British, because the American colonies were British colonies. And the British were concerned about the French. The French had possession of Canada and all of the land in what's today the United States west of the Appalachian Mountains. The English wanted to expand. So George was leading a force near current-day Pittsburgh. The French had begun building some forts out there. And so what do we have going on? What are the French and the British trying to do in North America?
Inhabit it.
They're already inhabiting it, right? So what are they trying to do above that?
Take control.
They have control of territories. George Washington's moving west. What is he doing? Expanding.
Isn't that called the manifest?
It will be later, yes. So the British are trying to maintain their western borders against what they perceive as French aggression. So are the French and British abiding by the balance of power? Not in North America. So the war starts there, and it spills back into Europe in 1756. And what's it called there?
7 Years' War.
The 7 Years' War. Now, the last pages that you guys read, on page 316, it's all about the war in North America. Historians call the war that happened in 1914, it's now been named World War I, but at the time they called it the Great War. Then people called it the First World War. Based on what you've read, was that war really the First World War?
No.
What war was?
7 years.
Yeah, it's fought where? Europe? India,
and North America.
and North America. That's pretty much a global conflict, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right? Something very important happens in the midst of this war. You met a guy named William Pitt the Elder on page 316. What did William Pitt do that won the war for the British? Where did he focus British strength?
Naval.
In the coast?
North America. When this war began, fellows, again, this is the British colonies in America. The colonists in this country, who became Americans eventually, were required by the British Crown to go fight. So that would mean, in some cases, leaving your homes unattended. And who was also involved in this conflict in North America? The Native Americans. So if you leave your farm and you're conscripted into the British Army, what might happen to your family?
Killed.
They might be slaughtered. So what the British were doing is treating their colonists in North America really quite badly in encouraging them to serve. What William Pitt figured out was, if we give them basic rights and treat them like citizens, sounds like Enlightenment to me, a little bit. If we give them the same honor that is accorded to a regular British soldier, what might they do a little more effectively?
Fight.
Fight. They will fight more effectively. So his strategy to focus the combat in North America by treating the soldiers, the colonial soldiers, more regularly and more evenly, it bore fruit because the war was won. Significant battles up in Canada, at Quebec and Montreal, they basically defeat the French. And this is incredible, guys. What did the British get by winning this war? Last question, and then
The
you
world's
go.
greatest colonial power.
The world's greatest colonial empire. They get India. They get Canada and North America all the way to the Mississippi River. That's going to be a blessing and a curse for Britain, because what happens only 12 years later?
Revolution.
There's a revolution in the American colonies. Because what have guys like Thomas Jefferson and company been reading about in the 1760s and 1770s?
Freedom.
They've been reading John Locke. They've been reading Montesquieu. When the American Revolution happens, what do you think the reaction is back in Europe? A little nervous. When America gains its independence, who's the most nervous monarch in Europe, do you guys think?
Philip.
Louis XVI of France. Because remember, no parliament there since 1614. So he's not willing to be enlightened. The American colonists, in revolting against their British masters, as one historian called it, the most British thing that the American colonists did was to revolt against the British. All right, that's all, guys. Thanks for your attention. Have a great Parents' Weekend.